The Haunting of Lakeshore Hotel. I never thought my life would take me to Chicago, let alone to the Lakeshore Hotel. The building was a relic of a bygone era, standing tall against the city skyline. Its grandeur had faded over time, leaving behind cracked walls, dimly lit hallways, and an air of despair. But when my childhood friend, Sarah, called me in a panic, begging me to help her investigate the strange occurrences there, I couldn't say no. "Michael, I'm serious," Sarah's voice trembled through the phone. "The guests keep complaining about screams at night. Cold hands brushing against them. And there's this room, room 713. No one stays there without leaving terrified." "Come on, Sarah. You know how old buildings are," I replied, half joking. But her silence spoke volumes. "Please," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I need you here. Tonight." I arrived at the Lakeshore Hotel just after midnight. The city's bustling streets were eerily quiet, and a heavy fog rolled in off Lake Michigan, swallowing the towering structure. As I approached the entrance, the air seemed to thicken, pressing against my chest like an invisible weight. The lobby was dimly lit, with chandeliers that flickered faintly, casting distorted shadows on the marble floor. Sarah was waiting for me by the reception desk, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered, glancing nervously at the empty hallways. "It started again tonight." "What started?" I asked, lowering my voice. "The whispers," she said, clutching her arms. "They're coming from room 713. Sarah led me to the staff lounge, where she retrieved an old leather-bound book. "This is the hotel's log," she explained. "It dates back to when the hotel opened in 1928. She flipped through the yellowed pages until she found the entry she was looking for. Room 713. It's where a young woman named Eleanor Bell was murdered in 1932. She was a performer at one of the underground jazz clubs here during Prohibition. They say she had an affair with a mob boss, and when he found out she was planning to leave Chicago with another man, he killed her." "And now you think her spirit is haunting the place?" I asked, trying to hide my skepticism. "I don't think, Michael." "I know," Sarah insisted, her voice shaking. "People who stay in that room report the same things, hearing a woman crying, seeing shadows moving, and waking up with the sensation of someone sitting on the bed." I leaned back, processing her words. "All right," I said finally. "Let's check it out." The elevator ride to the 7th floor was suffocating. The air grew colder the higher we ascended, and by the time the doors slid open, I could see my breath in the faint light. The hallway leading to room 713 was narrow and silent, the kind of silence that wasn't just an absence of sound, it was oppressive, heavy, and unnatural. "Here it is," Sarah whispered, stopping in front of the door. The brass numbers 713 gleamed faintly, their edges tarnished with age. I hesitated before pushing the door open. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the city lights outside. It smelled faintly of mildew and something metallic, blood, perhaps. "Do you feel that?" Sarah asked, hugging herself. The air was icy, even though the hotel's heating system was working fine. A sense of unease crept over me, but I shook it off. "It's just an old room," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Then, the whispers started. It was faint at first, like the rustling of leaves. But as we stood there, it grew louder, taking on the distinct cadence of a woman's voice. "Help me. Please." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Sarah grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, my throat dry. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty room. There was no response, only the sound of soft weeping coming from the corner of the room. I turned my flashlight in the direction of the noise, but there was nothing there. And then, the door slammed shut behind us. Sarah screamed, and I rushed to the door, yanking at the handle. It wouldn't budge. The room felt like it was closing in on us, the walls seeming to pulse and breathe. "Michael, look," Sarah cried, pointing to the mirror on the wall. Words were forming on the glass, written in what looked like blood. "You can't leave. Help me." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. "Eleanor, is that you?" I asked, my voice shaking. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the weeping stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl. "She doesn't want us here," Sarah whispered, backing away. The growling grew louder, filling the room with an oppressive energy. The temperature dropped further, and I could see frost forming on the windows. "Michael, do something." Sarah screamed. I grabbed the old logbook from her hands and began flipping through the pages, searching for anything that might help us. Finally, I found a note scribbled in the margins: "Eleanor seeks peace. Return what was taken." "What does that mean?" I muttered, but before I could think further, the growling stopped, replaced by the sound of heavy footsteps approaching us from the shadows. A figure began to materialize, a woman in a blood-stained dress, her face pale and her eyes dark hollows. She pointed a trembling finger at Sarah. "Give it back," she rasped. "Give what back?" Sarah cried. I looked down at the logbook and noticed something tucked inside, a small, gold locket. I pulled it out and held it up. "Is this what you want?" Eleanor's ghostly figure nodded, tears streaming down her face. I placed the locket on the floor and stepped back. Eleanor's apparition moved toward it, her form growing fainter with each step. She picked up the locket, opened it, and let out a soft sigh. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. Then, she vanished, and the oppressive energy in the room lifted. The door creaked open, and Sarah and I stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for air. As we descended the stairs, I glanced back at room 713 one last time. The door was ajar, and for a moment, I thought I saw Eleanor standing there, smiling softly before disappearing into the shadows. The Lakeshore Hotel was demolished a year later, making way for a modern skyscraper. But to this day, people walking past the site report hearing faint whispers in the wind, as if the past refuses to be forgotten. I still think about that night often, about the fear, the whispers, and Eleanor Bell's tragic story. And though I'll never set foot in that place again, a part of me knows she's finally at peace. Or so I hope. The Forgotten Basement of Ashland Avenue. The chilling wind of a late October evening whistled through the towering skyscrapers of Chicago. Ashland Avenue, typically bustling with activity, was eerily quiet that night. The streetlights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows on the sidewalks. Ethan Harper, a 27-year-old freelance journalist, adjusted the strap of his camera bag as he walked toward an old, abandoned apartment complex. The building had been the subject of whispered rumors for decades, a place where tenants mysteriously vanished, leaving behind apartments filled with untouched belongings. Ethan's curiosity had been piqued after stumbling upon a decades-old news clipping titled "The Disappearance of the Ashland 8." Ethan's editor, Linda, had laughed at the idea of covering an urban legend, but he was determined to uncover the truth. "This could be my breakthrough," Ethan whispered to himself, his breath forming faint clouds in the cold air. He stepped through the broken gate of the crumbling building, its facade marred by graffiti and time. A rusted sign above the entrance read, "Ashland Heights, Est. 1923. Ethan's pulse quickened. He wasn't a believer in ghosts, but the heavy silence surrounding the building felt unnatural. He set up his camera, speaking into it for his vlog. "This is Ethan Harper, investigating the haunting of Ashland Heights. Tonight, we uncover the secrets hidden behind these walls." Inside, the air was damp and smelled of mildew. The floor creaked under his boots, and broken furniture littered the lobby. A shattered chandelier hung precariously above him, swaying slightly as if moved by an unseen force. Ethan paused when he noticed a faded mural on the wall depicting a grand ballroom. Beneath it, a phrase was scrawled in red paint, "They never left." His flashlight flickered. "Seriously?" he muttered, giving it a shake. He continued exploring, documenting every detail. Old newspapers, forgotten suitcases, even a child's teddy bear lay scattered, as if the residents had fled in a hurry. As he approached the staircase, he heard it, a faint whisper, like someone calling his name. His heart thudded. "Is someone there?" he called, his voice echoing. Silence. He chalked it up to nerves and climbed down to the basement, where most of the disappearances had reportedly occurred. The air grew colder as he descended. The narrow staircase led to a heavy, rusted door. He pushed it open, revealing a cavernous basement lined with lockers and storage units. The walls were lined with faded posters from the 1930s, and a single light bulb flickered overhead. As Ethan explored, he noticed strange symbols etched into the floor, circles, triangles, and what appeared to be claw marks. His camera beeped, signaling low battery. "Damn it," he muttered, switching to his phone. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him. Ethan froze, his breath hitching. "Hello?" he called out, his voice trembling. No response. He tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in. "Hello," guttural growl echoed through the basement. Ethan spun around, his flashlight illuminating the far corner. His blood ran cold. A figure stood there, its back to him, a tall, shadowy silhouette with unnaturally long limbs. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded, his voice cracking. The figure didn't move. Slowly, it turned its head, revealing hollow, glowing eyes and a twisted smile that stretched unnaturally wide. Ethan stumbled back, his flashlight dropping to the floor. The figure stepped closer, its movements jerky, like a marionette. "Leave," it whispered, its voice a guttural hiss. Terrified, Ethan turned and ran, but the basement seemed to stretch endlessly. Every door he tried was locked. The growling grew louder, closer. He ducked into a storage unit, slamming the door shut behind him. He fumbled for his phone, dialing 911. The operator answered, but before Ethan could speak, the call cut out. Outside, the footsteps stopped. Ethan held his breath, his heart hammering. Suddenly, the door was ripped open, and the figure loomed over him. Its hand shot out, claw-like fingers grabbing his wrist. Ethan screamed as a searing pain shot through his arm. Before the creature could drag him away, Ethan remembered the symbols on the floor. Desperate, he scrambled out of its grip and ran back to the center of the basement. He grabbed a piece of broken glass and traced the symbols, hoping they meant something. The creature roared, its voice shaking the walls. As Ethan completed the last symbol, a blinding light filled the room. The creature let out a deafening scream, its body dissolving into shadows. Ethan collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. The basement door creaked open, and the oppressive cold lifted. Hours later, Ethan sat in his apartment, replaying the footage on his camera. Most of it was corrupted, but a single frame showed the creature, its glowing eyes staring directly at the lens. The experience haunted him. He published the story, and it went viral. People from all over Chicago shared their own encounters with the supernatural. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the creature wasn't truly gone. One night, as he edited another video, he heard it, the same faint whisper from the basement. "Ethan." His blood ran cold. Some secrets should stay buried. The Whispering Room at Lakeview Grand. Nestled along the shoreline of Lake Michigan, the Lakeview Grand Hotel was a Chicago landmark. Built in 1925, it had hosted presidents, movie stars, and mob bosses. Yet, its luxurious reputation came with a darker undercurrent, whispers of disappearances, strange accidents, and Room 713, a room that hotel staff never spoke about. Jessica Moore, a travel blogger and urban explorer, checked into the Lakeview Grand on a stormy autumn evening. The lobby was breathtaking, marble floors, towering columns, and a massive crystal chandelier that seemed to hum faintly under the light. She was in awe of the hotel's grandeur but unaware of its grim history. Jessica approached the reception desk, where a middle-aged concierge greeted her with a forced smile. "Welcome to the Lakeview Grand," he said. "Checking in?" "Yes, under Jessica Moore. I booked a suite on the 7th floor." She leaned on the counter, glancing around. There was a faint, musty smell, like old books. The concierge's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he handed her a brass key. "Room 712, he said. "Enjoy your stay. And please avoid wandering around at night." Jessica raised an eyebrow but shrugged it off. Her curiosity burned brighter than her caution. Her suite was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city lights reflecting off Lake Michigan. But as she unpacked, she noticed something odd, a faint sound, like whispers, coming through the wall. Jessica paused, pressing her ear against the wall adjoining Room 713. The whispers were too faint to understand, but they were there, a continuous, murmuring stream of words. "Weird," she muttered, brushing it off as her neighbors chatting. Later that night, as she worked on her laptop, the whispers grew louder. They seemed to carry an eerie cadence, almost like chanting. She knocked on the wall. "Hey, keep it down over there," she called. The whispers stopped immediately. She exhaled, feeling a strange unease settle in her chest. She decided to investigate. Jessica stepped into the hallway, the patterned carpet muffling her footsteps. She approached Room 713 and knocked. No response. She tried the doorknob, it was locked. A shiver ran down her spine as she noticed something peculiar. The brass numbers on the door seemed tarnished, darker than the others. "Excuse me, ma'am." Jessica spun around to see a bellhop, a young man with wide eyes and a nervous smile. "You shouldn't be here," he said quickly, glancing at room 713. "That room. It's not supposed to be occupied." "Why? What's the deal with it?" Jessica asked, her curiosity piqued. The bellhop hesitated. "It's just. No one stays there. Ever. Please, go back to your room." Jessica's journalistic instincts kicked in. She needed to know more. That night, she dug into the hotel's history, scouring online forums and archived newspapers. What she found sent chills down her spine. In 1932, a mobster named Victor Greco had been gunned down in room 713 during a violent standoff. Witnesses claimed that, even in death, his face was twisted in terror. Over the decades, guests who stayed in the room reported strange occurrences, objects moving, cold drafts, and the sound of whispers. One guest, a young woman, had been found dead in the bathtub, her face frozen in the same expression of horror. Jessica's hands trembled as she closed her laptop. The storm outside had intensified, lightning illuminating her room in brief, blinding flashes. She tried to shake off the fear. "It's just stories," she whispered to herself. But deep down, she wasn't so sure. That night, the whispers returned, louder than before. Jessica sat up in bed, her heart pounding. They weren't coming from the wall, they were inside her room. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The whispers stopped. Then, slowly, the lights began to flicker. The temperature plummeted, and her breath became visible in the air. Suddenly, the door to her suite creaked open. Jessica grabbed her phone, turning on the flashlight. "Hello?" she called, stepping into the hallway. The corridor was empty, eerily silent. But as she turned toward room 713, she saw it, the door was ajar. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Jessica approached the door. Pushing it open, she shone her flashlight inside. The room was covered in dust, as if it hadn't been touched in years. The furniture was draped in white sheets, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling. On the wall above the bed, she saw it, "Get out" scrawled in dark red letters. She stumbled back, her flashlight shaking. But as she turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind her. Jessica screamed, pounding on the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping voices that seemed to echo in her mind. The air grew thick, and she felt a crushing pressure on her chest. In the corner of the room, a shadow began to form. It grew darker, denser, until it took the shape of a man. His eyes glowed a sickly yellow, and his mouth twisted into a menacing grin. "Why are you here?" the figure rasped, its voice deep and guttural. I didn't mean to intrude," Jessica stammered, backing away. The figure stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate. "They all say that. And yet, they stay. They always stay." Jessica felt her knees buckle as the figure loomed over her. Desperate, she pulled out her phone and shone the flashlight at it. The figure recoiled, letting out a bone-chilling scream. Jessica seized the moment, bolting for the door. It flew open as if by some unseen force, and she sprinted down the hallway. The whispers followed her, growing louder, more frenzied. She burst into the lobby, disheveled and gasping for air. The concierge looked up, his face pale. "You went into 713, didn't you?" he asked quietly. "What the hell is in there?" Jessica demanded. He sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Something that should have been left alone. We've tried to seal it, but it always finds a way to call someone in." Jessica left the hotel that night, abandoning her belongings. She wrote about her experience, but she never published it. The footage on her phone was corrupted, the whispers replaced by static. Weeks later, she received a package in the mail, a key to room 713, with a note, "You can't leave the past behind." Jessica moved to a new city, but she was never the same. At night, she still heard the whispers, faint but insistent. And sometimes, when she looked into the mirror, she saw him, the shadow with glowing yellow eyes, waiting.